Good morning, everyone. I'd like to, if we could put the first slide up, please, provide a little bit of context on the numbers. This chart shows the unrestricted financial position of the diocese over the past decade. So the numbers on the left-hand side are in thousands of pounds. So as you can see, for the first half of that decade, we were in pretty dire straits, so losses of anywhere between £500,000 to 1.2 million a year. Then there was a change of leadership. Bishop Martin came on board, and then Anna and Gary Peverley, our finance director. And as you can see, in the latter years of the decade, 2016 onwards, things turned around quite dramatically, moving to a near break-even position in 16 and 17. And then I'm delighted to say small surpluses in 2018 and 19. Of course, as we all know, what happened in early 2020, the COVID arrived and took the numbers in a very, very much adverse direction. You might say, well, 2020 doesn't look too bad. We managed break even, but as already has been mentioned, we received £600,000 worth of sustainability funding from National Church, as did many dioceses. So if that were not received, that alone would have pushed our numbers to over £500,000 of deficit. In addition, as Bishop Martin has already mentioned, great efforts on the part of the bishops and the parishes and the dioceses generally in the latter part of 2020 saw what was forecast to be a very, very poor showing on the parish share dramatically improve over the last 2 or 3 months of the year. So that really got us to a fairly decent position in 2020 through those two measures. 2021, again, facing a similar issue to 2020, particularly for the first 7 or so months of this year. Parish share in particular has been much below our anticipated number. In addition, we have the impact of clergy numbers, which is we can be thankful for, but they have been higher than budget and higher than previous years. Again, on the one hand, thankful for that, but in the short term, it is putting pressure on the finances and on the numbers. So at this point in time in 2021, we're looking at a deficit not far off £800,000 unrestricted, so quite considerable. Possible we may receive some support from Central Church, but thus far that has not been forthcoming. We can't rely on that. We need to make sure that our own house is in order. So it is on that basis that 2022, we're forecasting a slight improvement over 21, but we can't rely on parish share in particular going back to pre-COVID levels. Could I have the next slide? This again shows one of the reasons why the aging of the congregations in particular is just reducing the number of planned givers. So that in itself is reducing the availability. You can see the wavy orange line is the parish share, which is moving up around 6 million. The other thing I would say is inflation is not accounted for in these numbers. In other words, if we looked at the parish share that we were receiving back in 2010, 2011, in the region of £6 million, as you can see from the chart. But if that were inflation adjusted, that number should be closer to 8 million, purely because of the result of inflation. Nothing else, just the adding on of inflation on a compound basis. As Einstein once said, compound interest is the most powerful force in the world, or in the universe, I think he said. So that needs to be taken into account, and that, given that all of our other costs are suffering that inflationary pressure, is making it difficult to get back to a break-even position. And final slide from me. In terms of number of clergy, again, we can be thankful that the clergy numbers, which from 2010 we saw gradually reducing down to a low from about 140 to about 120 in 2018, that those numbers are now beginning to increase. So we're putting in place the seeds to nurture the return of increased parish share, increased development of the diocese. But as ever, before we get to that point in time, we will be in a position where our costs are outstripping our various forms of income. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Gary Peverley, who will take us through the detail of the budget numbers for 2022.
Thank you, Steve. So if we could have the next slide up, please. So you've seen the detailed paper. So these are just some of the highlights to bring out for you this morning. In terms of our unrestricted funds, so our day-to-day activities, it would be good just to give you some context as to where we are currently this financial year compared to the budget that we set last year. And the first line of this slide shows that at the moment, at the end of August, we were around £900,000 in deficit at this stage. And our budget for the full year was a £500,000 deficit. Our full year forecast, not taking into account any accounting adjustments, is around 1 million, 1.1 million or so. It will vary slightly maybe, but that's what I'm forecasting at this stage. Parish share receipts at the end of August were 3.5 million. In fact, they're now just over 4 with the latest report that went out yesterday to the end of September, and showing a slightly improving position, which is a really good. But I guess the message really is, please don't take our foot off the gas. There's still a long way to go. We budgeted for 6.4 million, just over, for the full year, and we think our parish share may be at a similar level to last year, around 6 million or so, or just under. The other side of the story is our costs are fairly well managed to date, but we do have a slight overspend on our total clergy numbers. So we budgeted around 110 FTE in our budget for last year, or for this year, and we're running 121 at this stage. That will come down to an average for the year, we think at year end, of about 116. So the message, I guess, when you consider the budget for 2022, is we are off track at this point compared to budget, in part mainly due to slightly lower parish share receipts and higher clergy numbers than we budgeted last year. So we move on to the next slide. I wanted to highlight some of the key assumptions in the budget for 2022 for you. Obviously, the paper goes into a lot more detail for all of these assumptions, but key things are that our net parish share, what we expect to receive for 2022, is around 6.4, what we budgeted for 2021. Our overall ask has remained the same at 7 million, and it's remained at that level for the last 2 to 3 years or so. So what we're seeking and hoping to see throughout 2022 is an improvement in the collection rates, the improvement in the amount that we receive from our parishes. We appreciate the context it's been difficult. We come from a base of around 6 million, maybe at the end of this year, but we hope to see an improvement over next year as hopefully things improve overall. The budget is based on the assumption that we will have 119 FTE in post. In the past, we've always had an increased number of clergy vacancies. Many of those are and have been filled this year, and that's a good news story, and lots of good appointments have been made. If you include our SDF projects and some of the initiatives that Bishop Mike and others talked about earlier, particularly in Growing a Golden Countryside, Inspiring Ipswich, our actual numbers of clergy are around 126. Now, last year, or for 2021, we had 0% pay increases for staff and our clergy. We budgeted for 2022 a 2% pay increase, and we budgeted 2% for our non-pay, all our other expenditure as well. But it is really important to highlight there are significant inflationary pressures at the moment. We hope in the short term, I think the general consensus is these will be short term, but they are adding particular pressure and burden to some of our costs. And of course, as we all know, the government has introduced a new social care and health tax or levy for 2022. That's not factored into this budget. It'll be around a 60 to 70k additional cost pressure, which we'll need to absorb during 2022. And we also need to maintain our liquidity, our cash flow, in order to be able to pay our bills. We need around £800,000 to £900,000 a month to pay our way. And we've not identified specifically, but we have included in the budget, in the cash flow, the sale of 2 properties or the liquidation of some of our short-term investments, so that we can maintain our liquidity and maintain our cash in the unrestricted fund. So on this basis, all in all, we're forecasting, or we're budgeting for a deficit of around 718K for 2022. If we move on to the next slide, please. So far I've talked around the unrestricted position, the £718,000 unrestricted position in the budget. But of course, there are many other funds that come into the picture. We have subsidiary Churchgates 2000 Limited. We have the DBE, who contribute to our numbers. We have other accounting adjustments. We have board trusts. We have lots of funds that make up our accounts. And this slide really is an attempt to bring that all together for you. It ties into table 1 in the detailed paper. But we've talked mainly around the top line, the £718,000 deficit that we see in the unrestricted fund. But when you take into account all those other funds, we're asking for an overall position, an overall deficit, table 1 in the paper of 498,000, because there are accounting adjustments, there are the additional income from Churchgates and the schools as well to factor in. So this slide is pulling it all together so you can see how it joins together. I think that one of the key things to say at this point is trustees and the team in the diocese are committed to taking all the actions that are required to break even in the medium term. And it's really important to ensure that we achieve both missional growth, and you can see that through some of the great initiatives that are happening, the increase in vocations, excuse me, the new income streams, growing in depth, so improving, growing in discipleship and giving and growing younger. All these things are around a positive outcome for all of us in the medium term to long term, but also with a view to breaking even in the medium term and creating a sustainable financial environment in the long term as well. And just the last thing from me, if we move on to the next slide. So again, this slide is to bring everything together so that when we look at the money motions in a few moments, you can see what it is you're being asked to approve and how it fits into the overall picture. So the money motions ask us to approve the parish share amount of 7 million, and also the overall spend, which is that red number at the bottom, £10,484,000. And this is how it all ties together so that you can see how those motions fit into the overall budget approval process that we're asking you to do today.